It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect drama. The walls were soft gray, the tables polished oak, the waitstaff dressed in sharp monochrome like they belonged on magazine covers. The music floated in the background, some mellow saxophone. Loop meant to signal class without interrupting conversation. The framed words near the door read, inclusive, inviting, intentional. And in the middle of all that curated calm, a woman named Simone Hayes stood quietly at the hostess podium, waiting to use the restroom. She hadn't come for dinner. Not this time. She wasn't dressed for it either. No designer heels, no statement. Bag. Just crisp white sneakers, dark jeans, and a lightweight olive jacket zipped halfway. Her short, natural curls were pulled back neatly, and her face, elegant, soft, unreadable, carried the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She just needed a restroom before her next meeting. It should have been simple. But it never is it? The hostess looked up from her screen, young, blonde, mid-20s, with a name tag that said Brooke and an expression that made it clear she'd already made a judgment. Her eyes flicked from Simone's face to her shoes, then back up, her smile tight and rehearsed. "Hi there. Do you have a reservation?" Simone offered a small smile. "No reservation. I just need to use the restroom, won't be long." Brooke's smile thinned even further. "Sorry, restrooms are for paying customers only. There it was." Simone tilted her head slightly. "I understand. I've eaten here before." Brooke crossed her arms lightly. "I'm sure, but we can't just let anyone use the facilities. It's policy." The words, "just anyone," hung in the air. They didn't have to be emphasized. Brooke's tone did the heavy lifting. Simone had heard it before, dressed in different phrases, delivered in different places, banks, boutiques, boardrooms. She could recite it in her sleep. Simone glanced past Brooke toward the dining room. Tables were only half full. Servers stood idly near the bar, refilling glasses and chatting. No signs of a rush, no waiting list, no reason to gatekeep a basic human need unless you were looking for one. "I'll only be a minute," Simone said calmly. "It's urgent." Brooke took a half step forward, her voice dropping into that professional warning tone, the one meant to sound neutral but always ends up sounding like a threat. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to respect our policy. If you're not planning to dine, I'll have to ask you to leave." Still no raised voice. Still no scene. Simone gave a small nod, turned away from the podium, and walked slowly toward the side wall, where a framed poster listed the restaurant's core values: hospitality, transparency, equity. Below it, just above the baseboard, was a small laminated square, a QR code. She took out her phone and scanned it. Brooke rolled her eyes. "That's just for feedback. It won't get you into the bathroom." But as the screen loaded, a quiet tone pinged in a locked office 2 floors above them. A dashboard on the back-end system lit up with a flashing red alert. Level 0 override. "Request! Owner access triggered." Simone didn't say a word. She didn't turn around. She didn't gloat or explain. She just slipped the phone back into her jacket and folded her hands calmly in front of her. She didn't need to announce who she was. The building already knew, because what Brooke didn't know, what no one on that shift knew, was that Simone Hayes wasn't just a guest. She was the majority investor in the entire brand. The real name behind the money that bought this location. The silent partner who had stood quietly through 2 years of expansion meetings, who had hired the architects, vetted the equity teams, and personally signed off on the exact lighting scheme that now illuminated the hallway she wasn't allowed to walk down. She didn't need the restroom anymore. She needed the truth, not the slogans, not the fake smiles, not the mission statements, printed on menus. She wanted to know if the place she helped build actually lived up to the values it sold, or if those words on the wall were just decoration for people like Brooke to ignore when no one was watching. Except this time, someone was, and this time it would be documented. Simone remained still, composed, and silent. The only movement was the slow blink of the override signal flashing red across the management system upstairs, alerting every executive in the chain that something had gone wrong at the very core of the company. And downstairs, in a room built on curated calm and designer lighting, things were about to get very uncomfortable for the people who thought they owned the space simply because they could control who got to use the restroom. Brooke didn't realize what she had done. Not yet. She returned to the host stand with a flip of her hair and a sigh that was just loud enough to be heard by the barback wiping glasses nearby. She typed something half-heartedly into the reservation tablet, probably a fake note just to make herself look busy, and didn't glance back at Simone once. As far as Brooke was concerned, the issue was handled. Just another person turned away. No harm, no foul. But Simone hadn't left. She stood in place by the equity poster, hands folded over her phone, still and quiet like a question left unanswered. She wasn't blocking the hallway, wasn't causing a scene. She was just there, existing in a space that clearly didn't want her, but one she had every right to occupy. The staff started to notice first. A busser slowed near the bar, watching the frozen screen upstairs suddenly shift from idle to alert mode. One of the servers tilted her head, confused, as the kitchen lights in the back blinked once. An automatic reset triggered by the system's highest level override. And then came the manager. His name was Dylan. Mid-30s, sleeves rolled up, tie a little crooked. The kind of man who thought being laid back made him more likable. He was summoned by a quiet ping from the office tablet clipped to the wall, beside the liquor license. A red banner scrolled across the bottom. Level 0 owner access triggered. Respond immediately. He came downstairs with a slight frown, wiping his hands on his apron like he expected a broken pipe or a guest complaint. About the lamb being overcooked. What he got instead was the hostess looking up with a forced smile and pointing discreetly toward Simone. "She's the one," Brooke whispered. "Tried to use the restroom without ordering. Got real passive-aggressive about it." Dylan turned, eyebrows already raised, and approached Simone with a polite but performative smile. "Hi, ma'am. I'm the floor manager tonight. I understand there's been some confusion." Simone looked at him, calm and unbothered. "No confusion," she said. "Your employee told me I couldn't use the restroom." Dylan tried to chuckle. "Well, I'm sure it wasn't personal. We just have a standard policy. Restrooms are reserved for dining guests." "Is that policy posted anywhere?" Simone asked, her voice even and steady. Dylan blinked. "Well, no, not exactly, but is it in writing?" "No, but—" "That's not uncommon." Simone nodded once. "So it's a rule you enforce selectively." The line landed softly, but Dylan felt it anyway. He scratched the back of his neck, suddenly aware of the quiet around them. A woman in a blue blazer at a window seat was no longer looking at her salad. A man in a baseball cap leaned slightly out of his booth, pretending to adjust his seat. Just to hear better. Brooke stepped forward again, trying to reclaim control. "It's not about who she is. We just can't let people off the street use our facilities. We've had issues." Simone's gaze moved to Brooke with all the weight of a courtroom. "What kind of issues?" Brooke faltered for half a second, then covered. "You know, loitering, vandalism, that kind of thing." Simone didn't blink. "And what about me made you think I was that kind of issue?" The question wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was surgical, precise. And now the room was listening, not pretending to listen. Actually listening. Dylan opened his mouth, but no sound came out, because he couldn't answer it. Not honestly. Not without saying the quiet part out loud. Simone pulled out her phone again and tapped the screen. This time, the tablet behind the host stand vibrated. A new screen appeared, one Brooke had never seen. A dark interface with golden trim and a blinking access level. "Simone Hayes, Executive Owner Access. Confirm presence?" Dylan stared at it, then at Simone, then at the code panel above the liquor display that had just lit up in green. His breath caught. "You're Ms. Hayes?" Simone didn't smile. She didn't offer her hand. She just answered with calm finality. "Yes." Brooke's face drained of color, her arms dropping stiffly to her sides. "I'm not here to throw anyone under the bus," Simone continued. "But when your staff decides who deserves basic dignity based on their clothes, their voice, or their skin, it becomes my responsibility." She stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward the clean, modern dining room with its intentional design, its polished wood and curated menus. "This brand was supposed to stand for something. It wasn't supposed to be like the others. I helped build it to be better, but better only works if people on the floor understand what those words on the wall mean when no one's watching." Dylan was silent. Brooke swallowed hard. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Simone said. "You didn't ask. You just assumed." By now, several diners had stopped pretending to eat. One of the servers looked visibly uncomfortable. Someone from the kitchen peeked through the swinging door, eyes wide. The air had changed. The hierarchy had shifted. Brooke tried again, reaching for some kind of defense. "I was just following what I thought was policy." "But it wasn't policy," Simone said, sharper now. "It was preference, dressed up as authority." Dylan cleared his throat, clearly scrambling. We'll get HR involved immediately. This doesn't reflect our values, and I can promise you—" Simone raised a hand. "This isn't about HR. This is about culture." She looked him dead in the eye. "Do you understand the difference?" He nodded slowly. But the truth was, he didn't. Not fully. Not yet. Simone turned her attention back to Brooke. "If you had taken 10 seconds to see me, not size me up, but actually see me, this wouldn't be happening right now." Brooke didn't reply. And then came the moment that would go viral. Quiet, simple, unplanned. A teenager near the back who had been silently filming under the edge of his table whispered to his friend, "She owns the place." That one sentence echoed like a stone in still water. She owns the place. It wasn't said with shock. It was said with realization. The woman they dismissed as just another walk-in had walked into the building she paid for, and she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded anything. She had simply asked for decency. And now, everyone in the room was watching to see what would happen next. The dining room had settled into a charged silence, the kind that usually only happens in courtrooms or churches. Simone didn't move. She didn't grandstand. She simply stood there, hands folded in front of her, while the room recalibrated around the truth. She wasn't just some woman trying to use the restroom. She was the woman whose name was embedded in the foundation. Brooke still hadn't spoken. Her eyes flicked nervously from Simone to the glowing tablet behind the host stand and back again. She looked as if she were trying to convince herself this was still salvageable, that maybe she could say the right thing and make the last 10 minutes vanish. But there was nothing left to say. The hierarchy she'd relied on, one that let her control who was allowed, who was welcomed, and who was watched, had just flipped in front of an audience. Simone turned slightly toward Dylan. "I assume corporate's been notified by now." He nodded, still pale. "Yes. The system sends an automatic escalation when level 0 is used. Our regional director might already be en route." Simone nodded back. "Good. I'd like her to see this place at its most honest." Dylan swallowed hard and stepped back. His authority had dissolved the moment her credentials lit up the restaurant's internal systems. Now he was just trying not to drown in it. Simone walked past him without another word. She didn't head for the restroom. Instead, she returned to the table near the bar, one of the better ones, the kind Brooke would have reserved for a guest, with a Rolex and a valet ticket. She pulled out the chair, sat down, and placed her phone gently on the table. The screen still displayed her admin credentials. She didn't hide it. A busser approached, slow and cautious. a water pitcher trembling, slightly in his hands. He looked about 19, freckles on his cheeks and a nervous energy that made him bounce on his heels. "Would you like a menu?" he asked softly. Simone smiled, her first real smile of the night. "Yes, thank you." He set the water glass down gently, like he was handling crystal, and handed her the menu with 2 hands. "If you need anything, ma'am," he added, "just let me know. Please." She nodded once. "You've been the most respectful person here so far. Don't think I didn't notice." He blinked in surprise and gave a shy smile, then retreated quickly toward the kitchen. Across the room, phones were buzzing. The teenager, near the back, was still recording discreetly, his lens angled carefully around a napkin holder. The whisper had spread like wildfire. "She owns the place." Texts were already being sent, video clips uploaded, hashtags forming mid-meal. Some guests quietly left, too uncomfortable to sit through the reckoning. Others stayed, watching, waiting, as if history might unfold over dessert. Brooke, meanwhile, hadn't moved. She stood behind the host stand, posture frozen, unsure if she should retreat, apologize, or run. But she did none of those things. She just stood there, hand gripping the edge of the counter like it might keep her from slipping under. 15 minutes passed before the double doors swung open and a woman in a Navy power suit stepped inside. The staff straightened instantly. Her heels clicked hard against the tile as she approached, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. Regional Director Alana Dorsey. Her expression was flat, unreadable. She looked at Dylan, then Brooke, then Simone, and then at the tablet still glowing behind the stand. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she pulled out her phone, tapped once, and held it to her ear. Somewhere deep in the system, the escalation alert cleared. The screen behind the bar dimmed. Alana placed the phone in her pocket and finally spoke. "Ms. Hayes," she said, her tone crisp. "I received the override alert. I came as fast as I could." Simone gestured calmly to the empty seat across from her. "You're just in time." Alana sat, setting her briefcase at her feet. "I trust you've been treated appropriately?" Simone raised one brow. "What do you think?" Alana didn't respond. She didn't need to. She turned to Dylan. "Walk me through what happened, every word." Dylan stammered something, trying to cobble together a version of the truth that didn't make him sound complicit. "She came in without a reservation," he said. "Brooke told her about the restroom policy. It escalated." Simone interjected, her tone cool. "No, she told me I didn't look like someone who should be allowed to use the facilities. That's not policy, that's profiling." Alana turned her head toward Brooke. "Is that accurate?" Brooke's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice, when it came, was high and defensive. "I didn't know who she was. I was just trying to protect the space. We've had problems in the past." Simone stared directly at her. "You were the problem tonight." Brooke's jaw trembled. She reached for words, excuses, lifelines. None came, because there was no policy, no precedent, only a series of decisions, each one made from assumption, wrapped in fake professionalism. Alana pulled out a slim folder from her bag. She opened it slowly, revealing a document with Brooke's name at the top. "You signed our inclusive hiring agreement when you joined the company. You also signed the equity compliance clause. Violations of those are not just HR matters, they're contract breaches." Brooke's face drained completely. "Wait, no, I didn't mean to. This was a misunderstanding." Alana's voice didn't change. "The system doesn't misunderstand. The cameras don't misunderstand. You made a choice." For a moment, the restaurant was so quiet, you could hear the clink of a spoon against porcelain 3 tables away. Then Simone stood up. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she said clearly. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here to see if the brand I helped build still lived up to the values we claimed to believe in. I came to use the restroom. That's all." She looked directly at Brooke. "But you made it about something else." Brooke's lips parted again, but no words came. Simone turned to Alana. "You know what needs to happen next." Alana gave a single nod. "Ms. Everly," she said, addressing Brooke formally, "you're dismissed from this location, effective immediately. You may leave your name tag and access card at the stand." Brooke stared at her in disbelief. "You're firing me?" "You fired yourself," Simone said softly, and with that, the final moment landed like a gavel. Brooke unclipped her tag, hands shaking, and set it down beside the reservation tablet. She glanced around the room looking for support, a lifeline, anyone who might say this had gone too far. But no one moved. No one said a word, because they had all seen it happen, and this time, the footage didn't need editing. By the time Brooke walked out of the restaurant, the world had already begun watching. The teen in the corner had uploaded the footage straight from his phone, the moment Brooke told Simone she wasn't the kind of person they allowed to use the restroom. The words weren't screamed or exaggerated. They were cold, professional, and unmistakable. The kind of casual cruelty that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding. The video, titled "She Told the Owner to Leave Her Own Restaurant," hit 30,000 views in the first hour. By morning, it was over 2 million. Hashtags spread like fire. Assume she owns it. Dine with dignity. Respect Simone. People didn't just watch. They responded. Some in shock, others in bitter recognition. The comments filled with stories from women and men who had been turned away, talked down to, looked through. Some were angry. Others were heartbreakingly quiet. I wore a hoodie. To a rooftop bar, and they asked me to wait by the service elevator. My mom was followed around a boutique for touching a purse. Then the manager called security on her. I wish I had handled it with the grace that woman did. Simone didn't make a statement. She didn't schedule a press conference or speak to journalists. She didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself, and the silence she maintained afterward became louder than any speech she could have given. The restaurant closed the following day for a full internal review, according to a formal message posted on their website. But those who knew the system knew what that really meant. Damage control, restructuring, a very quiet, very expensive storm. Staff were called in for emergency retraining. The equity officer from headquarters flew in overnight. Everyone was told to reread the inclusion policy, rewatch the hiring videos, re-sign the code of conduct. But none of that carried the weight of the memory of Simone Hayes standing in the middle of the dining room with every eye on her, and not flinching. The next evening, the doors opened again. No media, no fanfare, no announcements, just soft. Jazz playing on the speaker system and a dining room scrubbed spotless, and she returned. Same jacket, same sneakers, same calm. She didn't say her name at the door. She didn't mention her status. She simply walked in and asked once again for a table. This time, no one hesitated. The new hostess, her name was Kira, a college student who had been called in from another location, recognized Simone instantly but didn't make a show of it. She smiled genuinely, motioned to the best table by the window, and offered water before Simone even sat down. A few guests who had seen the video looked up in quiet surprise, but said nothing. Simone nodded back politely and opened the menu, though. She already knew what she would order. She wasn't there to test anyone anymore. The test had already been graded. She was there for something much simpler, to sit in the space she owned and be treated like she belonged. Todd, the general manager, came out of the kitchen himself, not rushed or nervous, just present. He didn't bring papers or flowers, just sincerity. "Ms. Hayes," he said, voice quiet. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. We're changing everything. Not because of the headlines, because we should have done it long before you walked through the door." Simone looked up, met his eyes, and nodded once. Good. That's a start. I hope you'll let us prove it. I don't need proof, she said. Just consistency. He nodded and stepped away. Her food arrived. Hot, balanced, plated with care. No sarcastic tone, no discarded silverware. Just a meal served with dignity, and this time, as she took her first bite, the flavors were what they were meant to be. Simple, nourishing, whole. She ate in peace. Across the room, conversations returned to their normal hum, but a few glances still drifted her way. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but something softer. A kind of respect not forced by title, but earned through restraint. And somewhere deep in the back office, a notification buzzed. The restaurant had received a 5-star review anonymously submitted. The food was fine. The staff tried harder. But the reason I'll return? Someone showed us that you don't need to shout to be heard. Later that night, when Simone left, she paused near the same poster she had once stood beneath. The QR code was still there, but now it was bigger, redesigned. Not just for customer feedback. It linked to a new landing page titled, "Do We Still Live Our Values?" A space where guests could share honest stories of being welcomed, of being ignored, of being seen, and directly beneath the code, a small brass plaque had been installed. No logo, no brand name. Just a single engraved sentence in clean block letters. Dignity is not a privilege. It's the baseline. Simone didn't take a photo. She didn't need to. She walked past it with the quiet confidence of someone who had done what she came to do. Not to expose, not to punish, but to remind people that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in, orders dinner, and waits. In the weeks that followed Simone's silent stand, the restaurant became more than a dining space. It became a mirror for the staff, for the brand, and for the community watching from a distance. The viral moment had passed, but the story stuck, not because of outrage, but because of its quiet clarity. It was never about shouting. It was about what happens when someone with power chooses not to use it like a weapon, but a light. Corporate didn't wait. They called for a full review of every location. Not just customer service scores or sales metrics, but values lived in practice. Employees were pulled into one-on-one sessions with equity officers. Questions were blunt. Have you ever watched someone get treated differently and said nothing? What would you have done if you hadn't known who Simone was? Some answered honestly. Others fumbled through the expected phrases. But everyone remembered, because once a truth like that lands in a dining room, it never fully leaves. Todd, the general manager, didn't return to his usual pace. He changed. He stopped managing the schedule like a spreadsheet and started asking questions. Real ones. What biases do you think we bring in when we seat people? When do you feel seen, and when don't you? He scheduled check-ins with each team member, not for disciplinary notes, but for growth. The staff wasn't used to that, but the shift came slowly, genuinely. One afternoon, Kira, the new hostess, asked if she could make a suggestion. "The way we greet people," she said. "I think it sets the tone. What if we rewrote the script? Not just how many, but something warmer, something human." Todd agreed immediately. They workshopped the phrasing as a team. Meanwhile, the plaque Simone had passed by, the one that read, "Dignity is not a privilege, it's the baseline," became a subtle landmark. Guests would pause near it, sometimes reading it twice. Occasionally, someone would ask about it, and the staff had learned to answer with simple honesty. "It was placed here after we forgot who we are," she reminded us. In the break room, the staff wrote down moments where they had caught each other doing something right. One index card read, "Julian waited for an older guest to walk all the way in before seating anyone else. No rush, just respect." Another. Yasmin offered to translate for a nervous guest who didn't speak English. Stayed with her the whole meal. There was no reward attached, no bonus, just acknowledgement. And that was enough. Back at headquarters, something else was changing. Simone never demanded new policies, but leadership understood the message. Their slogans meant nothing unless the front lines lived them. So they did something radical. They invited field staff to help rewrite the brand's core code of conduct. Baristas. Bussers, hosts, line cooks, people who had spent years behind counters and stoves were asked to sit in round tables and say, "This is what respect looks like where I stand." It wasn't just PR, it was culture repair. Simone didn't lead those sessions. She didn't have to. Her presence had already redefined what leadership looked like. Quiet, intentional, lasting. But the effect of her visit didn't just ripple upward. It rippled inward. Dylan, the floor manager who had frozen under pressure that night, asked to transfer to a different location. Not out of shame, but reflection. He told HR he needed to start over. "I didn't see her," he said plainly in his exit interview. "And that's the worst part. I thought I was one of the good guys." He wasn't fired. He was rehired in a mentorship program Simone had helped fund years earlier, a program for mid-level managers who wanted to unlearn and relearn leadership. He started over at a smaller location in Tulsa. First week, he scrubbed floors with the kitchen crew. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he said, "I think I need to listen better from the ground level." And Brooke? She disappeared from the restaurant industry entirely. No one knew where she went. Some staff speculated she moved out of state. Others heard she applied to a job in real estate. But her name became a cautionary whisper, not out of cruelty, but clarity. Not because she had enforced a policy, but because she had made one up when she didn't see a person worth making space for. As for Simone, she returned only once more. This time, no one noticed her at first. She wore the same sneakers, the same jacket. No entourage, no announcement. She walked in just as the dinner shift was starting and paused at the podium. Kira looked up and smiled immediately. "Welcome back," she said warmly. "It's good to see you." Simone nodded. "You remember me?" "Of course," Kira replied. "You changed how we do things." Simone's eyes softened. "You kept the plaque," Kira smiled. "We read it out loud at staff meetings now." Simone nodded and looked. Around the room, not for perfection, not for polish, but for something harder to name. The energy had changed, not completely, not permanently, but meaningfully. She didn't stay for dinner. She didn't sit down or ask for service. She just stood for a moment, watching the team she had once shaken quietly into awareness, now moving, with intention. Eye contact, small smiles, real presence. Before she left, she turned back to Kira and asked a final question. "Do you know why I came back that first night?" Kira shook her head. "To see if the words on the wall were real," Simone said. "To see if anyone here believed them." "And now?" Kira asked. Simone smiled. "Now I know someone does." She turned, stepped back out into the early evening air, and disappeared into the city streets without a word. No flash, no headlines, just a story that had already written itself into the DNA of the space. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't march or scream. Sometimes it just takes a seat, says nothing, and waits to be seen. And when it finally is, everything changes. In the days that followed, the story faded from headlines, but it didn't fade from memory. Not for those who were there, not for those who watched from the edges of the internet, quietly nodding at a truth they'd known far too long. Dignity is not given, it's withheld. And when someone finally refuses to let it be denied, The silence that follows is louder than any crowd. Simone Hayes never told her story. Not to reporters, not to talk shows, not even on social media. She didn't give interviews. She didn't tweet a thread. She never once uttered the phrase, "I went viral," because for her it wasn't a victory. It was a mirror, and one she didn't need to stare into twice. She went back to work. Not at the restaurant, but at the foundation she ran on the other side of town, where she'd been quietly funding scholarships for young people of color in hospitality. Students who wanted to change the system not just by entering it, but by remaking it from the inside. She doubled the size of the program that fall. Not in response to the incident, but because the moment reminded her how far there still was to go. Across the city, and in quiet corners of other restaurants, her name became more than a name. It became a checkpoint, a pause. Would Simone feel seen here? Some began asking in training sessions, not because she demanded reverence, but because her silence had set a new standard, a new kind of leadership, one that didn't need to raise a voice to create impact, one that simply showed up, asked nothing, and waited to be seen. And maybe that's what made the moment last. Not the outrage, not the headlines, but the restraint. Because Simone never asked for revenge. She never asked to be worshipped. All she asked was to be treated like a person. And when that failed, she didn't erupt. She didn't retaliate. She just let the system identify itself, on camera, in its own words, and walk itself into consequence. She reminded everyone watching that power doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it just needs presence. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who speaks the least, but cannot be ignored. And what of the restaurant? It still stands, still serves. But it's different now. Not perfectly, not magically, but deliberately. There are no more hidden policies. The staff rotates through regular empathy training, not to check boxes, but to open eyes. And that brass plaque still hangs by the entryway, catching sunlight through the glass as people walk in. Dignity is not a privilege. It's the baseline. Most guests pass by without noticing it. Some pause, a few ask. But those who know. Every so often, a new hire hears whispers. They ask, who was she, really? And someone points to the quietest part of the story. Not the viral clip, not the outrage, but the moment Simone unfolded a napkin and sat at the table they tried to take from her. Not with fury, not with fire, just quiet, deliberate stillness, and in that stillness, the lesson stayed. It stayed with the young busser who learned how to meet someone's eyes and mean it. It stayed with the floor manager in Tulsa scrubbing floors so he could learn humility. It stayed with the guests who saw a woman in jeans and sneakers reclaim a space she already owned, not with threats, but with grace. It stayed because it didn't try to go viral. It stayed because it didn't shout. It stayed because it was true. And in a world so desperate for noise, sometimes the stories that stay are the ones told without ever needing to raise a voice.